everyone. Welcome to How We Cope podcast, a podcast dedicated to elevating your life by your host, Nicole Nurian, licensed therapist and life coach. Today's podcast is sponsored by Culver City Chevrolet, where if you mention you're a subscriber, you can get an awesome deal of $189 for a Chevy EV. Today, we're going to talk about a concept that we all have to eventually deal with, grief. What is it and how do we cope? With me today is my very good friend, Deeba Abershamshi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deeba. Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. I know this is something that you and I have talked about a lot. So, I hope that only our tools can help others. Like I said, I'm Deeba. I'm 28 years old. I am originally from New York. I moved to LA about 5.5 years ago. And I work in the music industry here. And it's a pleasure to be here today.
Great. Happy to have you. So let's just get into what grief is. Grief is a feeling that we have when there is loss, when we lose someone. I think this term was coined originally to talk about death, but we can feel grief in all areas of our life, whether it's a job loss, a breakup. And so for the purposes of this episode, we're going to be focusing predominantly on death because Deeba and I have both experienced sudden death, and it's a subject that we feel super passionate about. So on that note, let's just bring in some psychology terms here. So every time someone mentions grief, you always hear about the 5 stages, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I think when people first hear this, they think that this happens in order, and this is definitely not the case. You can feel either of these stages at different points. You can feel them in 1 hour, you can feel them in 1 day, and you can go backwards. And so I think that that's a really important thing to note because healing, especially when you've lost someone, is not linear. It's kind of like a forever path. But I know, Deeba, you have strong feelings about this.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's really not linear. I think it's really important to recognize how people can grieve really differently. And one thing I wanted to point out is that I always had an interesting bone to pick with the stage of acceptance, because I think it suggests that that's where it all ends. And that's the last stage. And you just accept it and you never feel that pain again. And I think these are all ongoing stages and that they can pop up at any moment. Like you said, they can pop up all at once in the same hour. And I was listening to a podcast on grief at some point throughout my journey. And there was someone who mentioned that they, petitioned to the original people that coined these 5 stages to add a 6th one called finding meaning, which I really have leaned on throughout my grief journey. And we'll get to why that is and what finding meaning really means, because I think another controversial thing is, we all hear the triggering, everything happens for a reason, which is a really hard thing to hear when you're grieving and you can't find a reason and you don't know why such a horrible thing has happened to you. But I do think there's different ways to find meaning that don't take the pain away, but that help you have a cushion for it. So we'll get into that.
Yeah. And I think on that note too, something that felt good for me was hearing the idea or this kind of saying of may their memory be a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you have someone tell you like everything happens for a reason and this is going to make sense one day, it's like nobody wants to hear that when somebody in their life just died.
Absolutely.
And so I think that to have someone's memory be a blessing, there's so much that we can make from that. Like we can honor them in so many ways, but then also like friendship is a blessing. Love is a blessing. Then putting it into our work, even talking about it like we are right now, this is making their memory a blessing. So that's always felt really good for me.
Absolutely. And I think that is a big reason that's brought us closer. If it weren't for what we had both gone through, we wouldn't have this new lens to connect. And
totally.
For those of the listeners that don't know, Nicole and I had been in each other's lives, but it wasn't until we had bonded over our sudden losses, mine of my father and Nicole's of her sister, that we could really come together in this new way and bond like we never had before. So I think for me, a way that I've made my father's memory a blessing is by, being able to have this shared love and shared connection with others who have experienced close loss. And, we can come together on what that feels like. And it's really hard to not feel isolated in that experience. So having people like Nicole that I can talk to about it has really been huge for me.
Yeah, totally. And so I think on that note, how did grief find you?
The first word that comes to mind is suddenly,
Hmm.
very suddenly. I'll start by saying I moved to LA in September 2019. My dad was a big proponent of me actually taking this chance to pursue my dream of working in the music industry. And that's very unlike, an immigrant father. He was born in Iran, and, him pushing me to pursue this was very rare. But he passed very suddenly. He was not sick. And funny enough, an inside joke that I have with my family is that he was invincible and immortal because he had gone through some pretty crazy near-death experiences and car accidents. He was like the worst driver ever. And, survived it all. So we always said, just God loves this man. God loves this man and will protect him at all costs. And then the unthinkable happened, and he passed very suddenly in his sleep. And I just remember the complete denial that took over, this complete shock. I almost think back to that time. I don't even remember. Like, you kind of just black out and block out all of the feelings and memories of that time. I don't know if you feel the same, but yeah, so it found me very suddenly in February of 2020, just months after I had taken this step to move. And of course, the feelings of guilt from being far away come up, the feelings of shame for when was the last time I spoke to him, and do I remember that vividly, and did I show him enough love, and all of those things come up. And I think what was also unique about my journey is that just 3 weeks later, COVID hits and the world shuts down, which was really specific to my grief journey, because I think if that had not happened, I would have gone about trying to cope really differently and maybe a little bit more recklessly. I'm someone who's very social and tries to keep myself distracted. I don't know if that's an Aries thing or what, but that was how I tried to cope until COVID had hit and really forced me to sit down with my grief and be with my family and just grieve.
Yeah, I think losing someone during COVID, I can totally see how you have to face it. Like, you're in the home, and then you're in the home with your family who's also going through it.
Yes.
So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For me, my sister died of breast cancer, but it wasn't a situation in which we actually saw her pass. She was diagnosed with breast cancer 10 years ago. And then, a few years ago, she had told our family that she's going to move to San Francisco and that she was going to distance herself. And we never understood why. And especially me, like being her little sister, I couldn't understand it. I was like, I don't get it. Like, what could possibly be going on? And it was so weird because I don't know what came over me, but there was this feeling of like, I may never see her again, which isn't normal to think. Like, when people are upset or disappointed, they kind of go and then they may come back, or at least there's this hope. But there was something in me that really felt like this could be it, and I need to like hug her a little tighter. And then, 4 years later, I'm in what I want to say one of the happiest times of my life. Like, I just became a therapist and I got my dream job and I had great friends and I was in a really happy relationship. And I remember my dad called me and he was like, "Hey, I'm going to San Francisco." And it was like the first night of Passover. So I was like, "Why would you be going to San Francisco? Like, we have Passover Seder tonight." And he was like, "Oh, Natalie's not doing well." And I was like, "Okay, like, what does this mean? Like, is her cancer back?" Like, and he was like, "Yeah, like, she's sick again." And I just broke down completely. I remember calling my boyfriend at the time and telling him, like, I think this is it. Like, and he was like, "I don't want you to freak out here, and like, it's gonna be fine. Don't get ahead of yourself." And then very quickly after, a couple hours after that, I was with my mom and we're sitting at this dinner and I see her crying because I am sitting there thinking, like, if she's sick, I need to go. Like, I need to go see her. I need to go get a plane ticket. And I just remember my mom kept crying and something came to me where I was like, she's gone. Like, she's already dead. And you guys didn't have the heart to tell me. And that's ultimately what ended up happening is that I always say, like, my sister died and didn't tell me. If I were to write a title of a book, it would be My Sister Died and Didn't Tell Me. And for me, that grief, as you know, is still a ever-going journey. But how I dealt with it was just so up and down. I mean, I went through a breakup 2 weeks after she died. And that was a relationship that felt so much easier to grieve. Like, I was like, who's your boyfriend compared to your sister? And so I was like doing everything to get over the breakup. And then I don't actually think I started feeling like the heaviness of that depression stage until I was with my now husband because I felt safe to actually feel.
Right. I think that's another thing that is a misconception, like going back to the stages is when we feel them. And, you know, it's so hard to be aware in the moment. You know, you're just in such survival mode. And, you know, at any point you can have delayed grief. And that's what happened to me as well. Just going through it during COVID, it was kind of easy when the whole world is kind of going through their own version of grief to just be distracted by that and then having to face what you're going through. And like you know, going through a breakup, you can just kind of focus on what's easier to focus on at the moment, which is like, you know, grieving a relationship and then it can hit you at any moment. But I remember, you know, both of us bonding over our stories being really sudden in their own ways. And I think, you know, one thing I want to point out is people assume that when you have a loved one who's sick, that you have kind of time to sit with it and that it somehow makes it better
or easier.
And I think those are really rough things to hear or to say or to assume. And I think no matter what your grief journey is or looks like, whether you had time to prepare for it or not, it's really, really painful and difficult. And for me, this kind of weird thing happened, which I've thought about when you were talking about your feeling of kind of knowing that something was wrong. It's almost weird how the universe can signal that to us because me too. I had just, you know, moved to LA. I was really happy. Things with work were going great. Every area of my life felt great. And suddenly I woke up one morning and I was like, I don't know what it is, but I can't get out of bed. I just can't get out of bed. I called my mom in a complete panic, having a near panic attack, crying hysterically, couldn't figure out why. It was a really frustrating feeling. And she just went through each area of my life. Is it work? Is it this? Is it that? I couldn't pinpoint it. And I said, I don't know what's wrong, but maybe I should start seeing a therapist. And she said, okay, but, you know, do you know where this is coming from? I said, I have no idea, but, you know, maybe it's just good for me to have a therapist there in case, God forbid, something severe does happen. And lo and behold, the next day is when I lost my dad.
Wow.
So I have no idea what that was. And he wasn't sick. And again, it was just sudden, but something was telling me that I would need this, you know, and I hadn't ever seen a therapist in my life before. And therapy has been huge for me ever since. And I know that that's what you practice and it's amazing. It's really changed everything for me. And it's just so wild that I had some sort of signal telling me to get that in line.
Yeah,
you know?
which is so important because I think sometimes people are so heavy in their grief that they can't actually muster up I don't even say courage, I would say the energy to go get help because it's
Yeah.
already so exhausting to be in a place of grief. And so it's just so amazing that your intuition went and told you, like, we may need this.
I still don't understand how that happened or where it came from, but I'm very, grateful that it did. And I think, like you said, that's one of the really unspoken about aspects of grief is how much work there is to do, even
Oh my
just
God, yeah.
it's finances and, just the the, you know, BS you have to deal with that no one tells you about in addition to just coping and surviving,
Mhm.
you know, and having to go search for a therapist and just put yourself in a place to survive. It's really, really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, being a therapist, it's one of the greatest honors of my life is being able to hold people's grief, especially since losing my sister, because as you know, but there's just such an understanding among people that have lost anyone, and it's not the same. It's not the same. Like, it's so individualized. But I think talking to someone that has felt it, you just feel like the walls can come down a little bit.
Yeah,
Like, yes, we actually want to talk about them, and that feels good. Like, me and you always talk about that. Like, it's okay to ask me how I'm doing, or it's okay to bring up their name. It's, again, going back to that idea of like, let their memory be a blessing. If connection is a blessing, then shouldn't we be able to mention them?
absolutely. I think that's such an important point that you bring up because I think people find grief a very taboo topic to speak about. A lot of people don't want to pick at it. They're worried about, making someone upset or, you know, there's ways to dance around it. And
Yeah.
I read this book called Option B by Sheryl Sandberg shortly after my dad passed. Someone had recommended it to me. And there's a chapter where she talks about the elephant in the room and how quickly people went from asking her, "How are you?" to "How are you?"
Hmm.
And I think people are just so uncomfortable with grief that they don't even want to look at it. And it can be really frustrating because we shouldn't have to walk around with a cloud over our heads. And, you know, it was really hard for me to realize that unless I had that cloud over my head, it would be really hard for people to know to check in on me. But then I realized, the onus was on me to bring my dad up and share stories about him and signal and model for others that I do want to talk about him. And, quickly I started to realize certain friends of mine adapting to that and seeing that, oh, she does want to talk about him and
Mhm.
starting to bring him up. And, it sucks that sometimes we do have to signal to others, but that's a gift we should give to ourselves.
Yes, totally. I think it's a gift that we should give to ourselves. And if someone's listening to this and is feeling, triggered by that, that's also okay.
Yeah.
Like, I remember, I think in the first year that my sister died, I did a meditation on like, what do I actually want? And it was this tape over my head that said, my sister died. Like, hello, like my fucking sister died. And I want you to ask me
Yeah.
because I want to talk about her. And it's so true what you say. Like, that is a gift. We have to make people uncomfortable, especially because it's not our whole life, but it's a big part of who we are now. And to not see that, I think it does a disservice to the friendship.
It's really hard. And I so relate to what you just said about just having that tape over your face or that sign above your head or that, just something to signal to people that this is what we're going to be going through forever. And that's why the acceptance stage, can kind of make it seem like it ends somewhere, but it doesn't
Yeah,
end. It's something that we move with forever. And, I think a really hard thing for me was learning that grief and joy could coexist
totally.
because I always felt like, well, if I'm not appearing to be grieving, then people will think I've moved on or people will
Mhm.
think I'm not, you know, honoring my dad or that I'm just past it or distracting myself. And I was so concerned with how it appeared to everyone else. And someone pointed out to me very early in my grief, like, do you feel like connected to your dad? Do you feel like you find ways to honor him? And I was like, yeah, I have, I've picked up my own rituals, which we'll probably get into
Yeah.
later. And this person said to me, well, that's all that matters. It's between you and your loved one, and doesn't matter. Everything else is noise. And that just gave me permission to feel joy without feeling like that was not
Doesn't cancel out the other.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I so hear that. I think that's how I felt. It was like, do we have to wear our grief on our sleeve in order for people to know that, yes, this is something I'm still going through, even though you see me smiling and happy and dancing? Like, the reality is that I want my loved one there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that we necessarily always have to bring in sadness into happy moments, because I think there's a lot of that comes in with grief, is like this guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Like the guilt of like, wow, I get to do these things and, she didn't. I have dealt with that plenty of times. But I think it's important that, like, when we are happy, like, can you actually bring them in the happiness? Like on my wedding night, I was so emotional when I was like dancing and I was having the best time, and like my grief just kind of came over me. And I closed my eyes for a second and I was like, oh, she's actually dancing with me. And so for like a whole minute, I didn't look at anyone. I was just fully, it was the like best 1 minute of the wedding, is I closed my eyes and like I saw the dress that she was wearing.
Wow.
And we were dancing together, and like just chills and tears and so much came over me. But like that is such a good example of, yes, we can bring them in to the joy, and you can see us smiling and happy, but like also know this at the end of the day is someone that has lost.
Wow. That's so powerful. I remember looking at you on your wedding night too, and just feeling that she was with you. And, there's, again, just an unspoken thing that we can experience when we've lost someone, and that it's so hard to explain, which is why
I remember you looked at me like at one point in the wedding and you just squeezed me, and I was like, I didn't even need to tell you anything. Like, you just got it, which is what's so special about our friendship, that I'm sure a lot of people find special in their friendships when they've both lost somebody.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what are some misconceptions about grief, or things that you wish people knew more?
I think we've mentioned some of them, about how, grief and joy should be able to coexist, and how we do want to talk about our loved ones. But I also think people assume that, it's something that one day we just accept, and that when we've gone through those major 5 stages, it's going to just go away. And I think it does stay with us always. I think one thing I wasn't very prepared for was, I knew it would be in the big moments, but I didn't know it would just be in the grocery store or at work in the bathroom. It just comes in such waves. And I think people, again, assume that it just feels like sadness all the time, and it feels like heaviness, but it can really hit us in the happy moments, like you said. And, yeah.
Yeah. And I think just emphasizing too that it really does look different for everyone. And to not kind of put people on this place of like, oh, well, this is where she's at, or this is where he's at now, so he must be, over it, or he must be in this place. Like, it just looks different.
Even within your own family, you can be grieving the same person in such different ways. And that was a big realization for me. Like, I lost my father, but my mom lost her husband. We lost the same person, but that journey looks so different. And also me and my brother, we both lost our father, but that doesn't look the same because we're different people and we're going to grieve differently. And I think the best thing to give your loved one or your friend or anyone who's grieving is patience and grace. And also, that's the best thing to give yourself.
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
need to give ourselves grace. We need to
Totally.
give ourselves patience. We need to give ourselves permission, understanding.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
What would you say that grief has given you, or how has life changed?
I always say that, of course, I would, bring him back in a heartbeat if I
Yeah.
could, but I wouldn't change what it's given me and who I've become because of it. And that's a really hard thing to say out loud because I think it sounds like I'm happy that I went through this, but I just don't think now that I know the Deeba who's gone through this and the Deeba who's, had to choose resilience, maybe didn't have a choice, just had to spring
Yeah.
into resilience. I've now experienced life through such a different lens. And I think you can probably relate to that too. And
Totally.
the fact that it's brought us together, it's, made me pause a lot more. It's made me appreciate and cherish moments. It's made me more sentimental. And it's made me more spiritual in a way to really feel his presence in moments that, it can feel really hard to believe in something bigger. And, I'm sure we'll get into it, like how we've seen those signs and what they look like and how we know that they're with us. But I am very grateful for the lens that it's given me to see life through and to experience relationships through and friendships. And it's given me deeper empathy and a deeper understanding for others and what, hardship really looks like and how to be there and show up for others and for
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. For me, it sounds funny to say, or I guess weird to say, but grief gave me my husband.
Yeah.
And I struggle with that actually, because there is a big part of me that, when we go back to that comment of like, everything happens for a reason, like, I will get into the story of how me and my husband met, and we can kind of see it from there. But I think, I was 3 months post having my sister suddenly pass away, and my friends were trying to convince me to come on this trip to Miami. And I was like, I don't want to go to Miami. I was like, I'm depressed. I don't want to talk to anyone. I'm not going to like sit there and pretend to be happy. And I had really good best friends at the time that were like, you need this and it's okay. And actually, it's okay to come and be happy with us. And, I end up on a boat, as most girls do in Miami. But I just see this very handsome person who is quite quiet and to himself. And the boat was also so quiet. And I just wanted to play music. And I had asked him because he had the aux that day. I was like, can we play some music? And he was like, yeah, here, take my phone. And so I take his phone and I see it's a picture of another guy. And I'm like, okay, I don't think he's gay. So I'm like, who is this? And I asked him, and he had said, he was like, it's my little brother. He passed away 2 years ago. And I just immediately felt like I could breathe, like for the first time in so long, because I was like, this is it. Like, this is someone that has lost a sibling. And that for me was like the ultimate connection. And I had let him know that I lost my sister 3 months before. And we just immediately, 8 hours, start talking. We cried together that day. We laughed together that day. And, he was from New York and I was from LA. And here we are in Miami meeting. And the craziest thing, and we'll get to this too, but is that like I see a butterfly just in the middle of the ocean
I didn't know this.
around
Wow.
us. And I just was like, this has to be my husband. This has to be. And this has to be Natalie. And this has to be Nikon, which was Nevin's brother's name. And, from that point on, 2 weeks later, he bought a ticket to LA and we went long distance and now we're married. And so it's like to answer that question of what has grief given me, it's almost so hard, but easy to, at the same time, to be like, it gave me my husband. And in a lot of ways, if I'm speaking of the truth, like Natalie and Nikon gave me my husband. And I think that that's where grief can be so beautiful. And in another way, it's really allowed me to be a much more empathetic friend, a much more empathetic therapist. I mean, the space that I'm able to hold now is, I think, so much more in depth than it was before. And how it's changed me is definitely my tolerance.
Yeah.
Like, my tolerance for bullshit, for lack of a better word, is just so low. Like the things people sometimes complain about or the subject matter, like I'm not as interested as I used to be.
Yeah. I think what it does too is which is kind of what you're talking about, is it gives you perspective. You know, before I lost my dad, there were certain things I remember getting bothered by that now I'm just like, I don't even have the energy to like care about that right now, you know?
Yeah.
And it gives you a whole other lens to experience life through that wasn't there before. And that's why I think you and I can relate to each other in a very different way than if we hadn't gone through this. And that's why it can feel comfortable. That's why I'm sure it was just so instant to let your walls come down when you heard that Nevin had gone through that too, because it's a sigh of relief. It's this feeling of this person understands. And it's so isolating when you don't feel like anyone around you gets it.
Yeah, totally. And I think too, it it really shaped for me. This is another thing that grief has given me, but I think when somebody has lost someone, they either go down a path of like the opposite of spirituality and believing in God. And I think for me, like just how I met my husband, it really solidified for me that there has to be a higher power. Like there just has to be. There's no way.
I mean, that story is just every time
Yeah.
I hear it, there's something new that just sends chills down my whole
Yeah.
body.
And then, I mentioned this in my vows, but the Hebrew names of our siblings, like Natalie and Nikon, literally mean a gift from God. And so
Mm.
for me, grief has given me a new relationship, which isn't actually a religious one at all. It's just a very spiritual feeling of that there is something there. Yeah. So on that note, let's talk about signs. Like, have there been signs of your loved one? Do you believe in signs?
I think much like your story, it's hard not to believe in signs when they're shown to you, but at the same time, you also have to be, you know, in a way, like trying to find that meaning and trying to, you know that it's there. I think for me, I would try to talk to my dad and just be like, I'm looking for a sign. And then they started to show themselves more and more. But one really recurrent one that has been so beautiful and meaningful for me has been, you know, a, I always come back to the fact that my dad was huge in pursuing me to pursue music. And he showed me a lot of music when I was younger. And one of them being the band Pink Floyd. And his favorite song was Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, which the title is,
Speaks for itself.
speaks for itself. Absolutely. It's crazy that even before I knew what that song would mean, it was meaningful to both of us. And it's a beautiful song. But the way that it's shown itself through this whole journey has been unbelievable. The first time was when, COVID had hit, and the only way that we could gather was in backyards. So we had my cousins over in my backyard, and my neighborhood that I grew up in is pretty silent. There's never really that much noise happening. And suddenly, like, my neighbors just were blasting Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. And then after that had played, which we were all looking at each other and could not believe it, like no other song played. It was just that. And then it continued to show itself in so many different occasions. There was one time I was having a stressful, kind of chaotic day running from, the train in Penn Station. And I run outside, and in the station, there's a guy starting to play Wish You Were Here on the guitar. And so, of course, I am with one of my best friends, and she knows what the song means to me. So she just turns to me and we just like hug each other, and we're both crying because she knows what it means to me and she could feel it too. And I went up to the singer after and I told him, like, this is my dad's favorite song and he passed, and this was so meaningful to me. And he said, this was my dad's favorite song and he passed.
Oh, how
and
sweet.
It just allowed for a shared experience for both of us. And, I could have run onto the subway or the train station at any other point throughout the day, but the fact that it was at that moment just makes me believe that there's no possible way that, the signs aren't out there. And again, it showed itself in so many ways. I, went to Santa Barbara on Father's Day last year because I just wanted to be somewhere peaceful. And there's a giant mural that said, Wish You Were Here, just on Father's Day.
Wow.
It just is insane. And, I think dreams are another really big one. I've tried to write down all of my dreams that he's appeared in because we know how quickly a dream can just leave our brains. So I try to write it down pretty immediately. And lately, the dreams have only been showing up on big occasions, like my brother's wedding. The night before my brother's wedding, I had a dream about him. On my birthday this year, I had a dream about him. When I was like, had just found out that I had gotten a promotion, he appeared in my dream and told me how proud of me he was. And it's crazy because in the dreams, I always know that, like, I have this awareness while I'm dreaming, even that he's no longer with us. So I'm so grateful for this, that I'm able to hug him tighter.
Like they're in the dream and you know that
yes,
this is temporary.
Yeah, I know that I need to hug him or I need to really listen. And I think that is such a gift. I don't know, how that happens or the science behind that. But yeah, so these signs have really helped me like feel connected to him and to find meaning. And I think without them, it can feel really isolating. But that's why I try to keep my eye out, for that butterfly or for that thing to appear. And it takes a hyper awareness to see it, but sometimes it can just also hit us in the face.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. It does take a hyper awareness to see it sometimes. And I think that that's okay.
Yeah.
Because it makes us feel good and connected. And I think for me, like, there's so many different instances where I'm like, this just can't be a coincidence. Like, I kept seeing three-legged dogs like, over and over again in 1 week. And then I'm at like a walk with my friend and I see this three-legged Great Dane. And I was like, I gotta pet this dog. Like, this is just like happening too often. And I go to pet this dog and the guy looks at me and he's like, is your name Natalie? And I was like, no, that's my sister's name. And he was like, oh, I found an ID. It said Natalie earlier. She kind of looked like you. I was wondering if it was yours. And I was like,
wow.
I wouldn't have even I want to touch every dog I see, but I've been more respectful since having my own. And so I really felt inclined to go to this specific dog because I had seen all the three-legged dogs before. And like you said, butterflies for me, they just show up in places they're not supposed to. Mm-hmm. I remember it was my sister's memorial and I was on a flight home with my husband and it was a storm and I was freaking out that we weren't going to make it to LA. And I look out my window and there's a butterfly.
Wow.
I'm like, what? It's raining. It's pouring rain. Where did you just come from? And I didn't actually see this, but apparently during my vows, some of the guests came up to me and they were like, when you had mentioned Natalie's name, there was a monarch butterfly that flew over.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I think signs are there if we want them to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a hard thing to wrap your head around because, you want them to just appear. But I think the moment you see that first one and mm-hmm. you can just be privy to them happening all around you. And, it's interesting because my mom was having a hard time with the fact that he wasn't appearing in her dreams for a long time. And one of our cousins just keeps funneling her specific dreams about my dad to my mom, saying that he appeared in my dream and this was his message for you. And she just keeps having these dreams. So it's almost like he's sending them to a messenger of sorts until they can reach her.
Yeah.
And my brother, a week and a half before his wedding this year, it was the 5-year anniversary of my dad's passing. And this is in real life. My brother's a dentist. He had a patient that day named Parviz, and that was my dad's name, which his name's not John, it's
yeah.
it's pretty
Parviz
wild.
is
That
pretty specific.
Right. And so on the day, so that just really reminded me too that, my brother needed that day, just a week and a half before the wedding, and having a really hard time with the fact that he wasn't going to be there to walk him down the aisle, and to know that, oh, well, he's in my dentist chair today, and he's going to be there on my wedding day too. And we all felt it that day too. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned that about your mom, because I think, I was going to think of this when I was coming into this podcast of some people really don't feel like they get signs.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a client actually who lost his wife very tragically. And he's like, she keeps coming to everyone except for me.
Mm.
I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm her husband. And, it was a really tough conversation, because I don't think the truth is that she's not wanting to visit him.
Mm-hmm.
I really believe that sometimes we have to be the catalyst of the connection to our loved one. And so that goes into our next question of, how do you connect with them?
I think for me, ritual has been huge. And what that means to me, and it can mean different things to different people, but and this actually came from a good friend of mine who asked me, was there a favorite food he liked? And again, I think those questions are so important to ask our loved ones when they've lost someone, is, making their memory a blessing, is talking about what they loved and finding new ways to honor them. And, I talked about how he loved eggplant parm from this one restaurant in our hometown, this local pizzeria. And she was like, well, why don't we call them and let's see if they have a recipe, and why don't you make it for his birthday? And I loved that idea. And, I called this restaurant, and, it was this Italian guy, and he's like, yeah, you just, take the eggplants and you fry them, and he's just giving it to me really simple. And I'm getting emotional on the phone, because I'm like, oh, for this guy, he has no idea why I'm asking. So I decided to tell him I'm actually asking because this is my dad's favorite food. He loved to come here. And he said, oh, did you guys live at, and then he said my address. And I said, yeah, because I remember your dad would come in all the time. Really
Wow.
sweet man. Your family's amazing. I hope you guys enjoy. And, it just brought that humanness back to the experience into what I was doing. And ever since then, I've really kept it up as a tradition. And I invite my friends over, and anytime I tell them I'm making eggplant parm, they know what day it is. I'm like, hey, you want to come over on Wednesday? I'm going to make eggplant parm. They're like, girl, we got you.
Yeah.
And that's another thing is, people say, we were talking about what grief is earlier. And, I always hear this quote, grief is love with no place to go. And I've always had a bone to pick with that one too, because I think it does have a place to go. And, the fact that my friends can be there for me on a day like that, and that I can share with them what my dad loved and make them a meal, and they get to be a part of it. And we all can, just be in that moment of love and to give it to each other. It just I don't see that as it having no place to go. I see that it's around us, and that we can share it with others. And by using these rituals, we're honoring them, and we're also bringing what their memory was into other people's lives and making sure it stays alive.
Yeah. And for those of you who are listening, the very title of this podcast is how we cope. And I think how we cope with grief, it will look differently for all of us. But for me, how I cope is talking about her. I just talk and talk and talk about her until I feel like I got my fix for the day. And sometimes that can go on and on. I think reading was such a big one for me, like a book that I absolutely adore and has changed my life and my views on even life after death is Many Lives, Many Masters. It's a really good one. And
I've been meaning to read that. I really should get on it.
you haven't read it?
I haven't.
Oh, you need to read that book.
I know.
Like, you need to read that book now.
Everyone tells me I need to, and I really do need to.
Yes.
And that's another fun thing that I feel like people don't talk about often is that, like, I remember there was somebody who recommended me read a book. Like, it was like the week my dad had passed, and I'm thinking, like, now I have homework.
Yeah.
But then I did decide to read that book, and it really did give me comfort. And I think
What
it's
book was
hard.
that?
That was option B, which I mentioned earlier. But another book that's been helpful for me is, it's not all about grief, but it's, a really beautiful book, and it's called Tiny Beautiful Things. And there's one specific excerpt that is kind of about the finding meaning thing. And it, I won't really go into all of it, but all of you should read this book. It's amazing. But essentially brings up the idea that meaning can come back in so many different ways. And something that didn't mean something at the time can mean something later. And I think that's really beautiful too, because maybe when my dad was showing me Pink Floyd back in the day, like, I would never know what that song would come to mean to me until now, and until I've decided to give it the meaning that it has, and until he's decided to show me the signs of the meanings that it has. So, I think when we read books like that, it can give us comfort and remind us that there is and there are ways that we can cope. And another one I'd love to mention is just leaning on friends. That's huge, and it's hard to do when you feel like, you don't want to ask for help or you want to be checked in on, but sometimes it's okay to just be real. Someone's like, "How are you?" You know what? Today's actually a harder day. I'm feeling it heavily. And whether you're saying that to someone who's gone through it or not, it's important to lead with just really what's on our hearts that day. And I think that's how we let the love in, which is really hard to do because you're just like, oh, I wish someone could just feel it from me. Wish I could just have that tape over my head. But I've found that when I do just practice honesty and authenticity of where I'm at that day, I'm like giving myself that gift of letting the love in. So
yeah. There's a quote that kind of came to me when I was really heavy in my grief journey, which was that we don't move on, we just move forward. And that feels really good for me because I think, speaking of that book, Tiny Beautiful Things, she has this story in where she ends on, like, they're living on planet Earth, you're living on planet my daughter died. And a lot of the times I feel like I'm living on planet my sister died. And to not have this push that you have to move on or that you have to get over it, but that we have to keep moving because we get to, I think is a really important thing to kind of just sit with, is we can bring them in, right? Like we can keep their memory alive. We can talk about them with our partners, with our friends, with our children, if we choose to have them. Like there's so many opportunities to really cope with this loss by not actually losing them, because we've lost them in the physical form, but we get to talk to them every day, even if we, doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Or normal. Like, yeah, if I feel like there's something I want to say to my sister and like only her, as I'm sure there's things that you only want to say to your dad, I just say it out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And another thing that came up in one of the books I read, that book, Option B, and this is something that resonated with my mom because she listened to the audiobook at the time that I was reading the book, and that was really helpful that we could kind of read it together. And what resonated with her was this analogy of it you're at the top of a mountain and you have to ski down. And obviously, one way you could do it is just ski down straight, and you're going so fast that you might fall and injure yourself. And then there's another way that is taking it one turn at a time. You're making these big turns going down the mountain, and you might even stop every now and then to catch your breath, and you can't just start at the top of the mountain and look down and see like, how the hell am I going to get there? So it reminded me that we shouldn't put any pressure on ourselves to get through this all at once. And, if you've just lost a loved one, you may be standing at the top of the mountain being like, how the hell am I going to get through this? And the answer is definitely not by trying to get to the bottom of it as fast as possible, because you'll hurt yourself, but by taking it one turn at a time. And that was really helpful for my mom, who had to deal with all the the admin of losing a husband. You know what I mean? Like, you have to go through like the administrative, like the credit card, and shut down their phone and all this shit that no one tells you you're going to have to deal with. And she was just like, that was such a beautiful reminder for me. I had to just take it one turn at a time. And yeah.
Yeah. And therapy.
Therapy, oh my gosh.
Like,
thank God for therapy.
Thank God for therapy. Thank God for my therapist.
Thank God. I actually would be lost without her. I remember I told her, like, when we had our consultation, I'm like, my dad just died, but also there's going to be days where I'm going to want to talk about boys. There's going to be days where I want to talk about work. And there's going to be days where I'm going to want to talk about my dad. And I don't know what that's even going to look. I had no idea, like, what was going to come, but I wanted to make sure that I could still be me and that I wouldn't be defined by my grief. And she understood what that meant right away. She was like, I got you. And that's what it's been. And that's what life is. It's some days it's going to feel really heavy and we're going to want to talk about our loved ones. And some days we're going to want to just survive. And, it looks different every day.
Yeah, totally. Well, Deeba, thank you so much for being vulnerable and being with me here today to talk about something I feel really passionately about. For those of you listening, we are here for you. We're here to listen. This podcast will be shown every single week. And just a reminder, if you want a Chevy EV, go to Culver City Chevrolet. Subscribe.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. I know we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but, I'm just so grateful to have a friend like you in my life to relate on this on. And I hope that what we've shared can serve as tools for you. And again, there's no solution, there's no medicine, there's really nothing any of us could say to take the pain away, but there's always tools that you can turn to that have been helpful for me. And I hope they've been helpful for you. So thank you again, Nicole.